All right, hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about a general purpose decision process. So we've been going through all these specific things that we're going to do. Now I want to talk about a general purpose decision process. Because when you want to make a decision, you end up doing the same thing every time. What you should actually hear is something like blah, 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 $5,000, blah, 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 38%. And all the blah, blah, blah is the same. Don't get hung up in that, right? If you're making a decision about whether to get, major surgery or buy a hamburger, yeah, those emotionally are different, but theoretically what we're doing is the same sort of thing. We're just calculating the risks and benefits and the chance that we get them and trying to pick the right one. So I want to give you a general purpose rule, which is what we've already been doing. I didn't do this earlier because I thought it would be nice to practice a little bit, and now we can apply this more general purpose rule. So I developed a mnemonic device so that you could remember it. It's CRAFT, C-R-A-F-T, so write that down. Okay, so the first thing is I'm just going to run through it. Clarify your purpose, run a model, assess the outcome, follow through with implementation, and take time for reflection. Okay, so write that down because I'm going to ask you in a few minutes. Okay, clarify your purpose. What this means is state your goal. Figure out what you're trying to accomplish, right? You can't really get what you want if you don't know what you want. I mean, you might accidentally get it, but generally it's very difficult to get what you want if you're not sure what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And a lot of times we just do whatever we did in the past, okay? Why is the word clarify important here? Okay, clarify is important because a lot of times we have this nebulous idea of what we want, right? My wife's like, hey, do you need anything from the store? She goes, oh, get something yummy. I'm like, well, could you be more specific? So, I come up with some cereal. And she's like, that's not what I wanted. I'm like, it's yummy. It says right on the box it's yummy. Okay, so clarify what your purpose is. Why is this important? Spend some effort on this step, right? This is the most important step, figuring out what you're trying to do. Before you do anything, figure out what you're trying to do. So what do you hope to do with this resolution, right? So remember, we're trying to come to a resolution or conclusion, reached after deliberation. What are we trying to do that for? Why do we want to apply all this deliberation? So again, why did I decide to put this here instead of at the very beginning of class? Because I want to teach you stuff that you could practice, and we could practice that during class before giving you the general purpose rule, okay? But you're going to be doing this in your other classes. Now, in most of your other classes, you'll be learning the models and stuff, but always put this in mind in your other classes. Okay, run a model. So now I know what I'm going to do. Now I need to go do some algorithmic decision, okay? This is the consideration part. And we want to create a model of formal structure because, again, otherwise we just go through and say, ooh, that one's shiny, that one's yummy. Don't do that unless shiny or yummy is what you're shooting for. But generally, you don't want shiny or yummy. You want something more complex, okay? So pick your model. And again, this is probably what you're going to be doing in most of your classes. It's like, oh, here's how we do an audit. Here's how we calculate a derivative. Here's how we, do the four forces or whatever. But you first want to figure out what the thing is so I can run the right model. Then you want to run that model in a systematic way. The reason we do it in a systematic way is because our own desires change from moment to moment, right? So if you get somebody who's thirsty and you show them pictures of shiny stuff, they're more likely to see the shiny stuff in the pictures because they're looking for water, right? And you don't want that moment to moment variation knocking off your goals. The other thing is, this part actually becomes quite easy now that we have a lot of AI and stuff, because once you've figured out what the model is, you can ask the AI just to run it for you, right? You don't necessarily have to understand you should still understand some of the subtleties. But the point is, a lot of that process gets done in the background, okay? That's not where the action is, although that's a lot of stuff you're going to learn. You do need to understand what you're doing there, okay? All right, assess the outcome. So this just means check your answer. All right? So many times students turn in stuff to me, and I'm like, does that answer even make any sense at all, right? So like I have a decision tree where we're looking at whether or not you should paint your roof white, right? So you could save some money on your electric bill. Apparently it's a thing you can do. You can paint your roof right, save some money on your electric bill. And so the question is, should you do this? And I say you could save up to $100. And people will go through, calculate the whole decision tree, and they'll say, I'm willing to pay up to $444 for this because they got a math error in there somewhere. And I'm like, if you just looked, would you ever pay $444 to save $200? You would never do that. If you just look at your answer, 10% of the students could get an A instead of an F. I mean, it's one question, so it's either an A or an F. Anyway, the point is, always check your answer, right? You run a model, you do some algorithm, you don't say, hey, computer, do this, and then it gives you an answer, and you're like, oh, I suppose the computer's right. Read what it says. The same thing if you're using GPT, right? So get GPT, it coughs you up an answer, and you're like, oh, hey, I'm just going to give that to somebody. Don't just give it to somebody. Read it and say, oh, yeah, that's not actually what I meant. Always double check and make sure that what your answer is makes sense in the world. It still may be wrong, whatever, but don't just make a dumb mistake. Fix the dumb mistakes, okay? And have test data if possible. Do an easy version. If it's a hard decision, break it down and make it an easy decision, and then make it more complicated. Don't necessarily start with the hardest possible way to do it. Start with the easiest way to do it and work your way up. All right, so always double check your answer. And then if you need to go back, say, oh, look, I just made a typo there. Fix that. Follow through with implementation, okay? So when you make a decision, you don't actually have to do anything. You can just decide. But in this case, usually you want to make a decision so that you can implement it and do something. The implementation is often harder than actually making the decision, right? So it's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to, my grass was dying, and I thought, hey, I'm going to put new grass down. Well, it was easy to decide that, but it was really hard to go out and scrape all the grass off. I hired somebody to do it. In any case, the point is there was a lot more effort in implementing, and this is why companies have COOs, Chief Operating Officers, right? Because that's a very important thing. Just, hey, you don't have to figure out what we're going to do, why we're going to do, but you have to figure out how to get it actually done. This is a really, really big deal. Okay, so after you do the implementation, here's the most important step. What's the other most important step? Okay, there's two most important steps. Do a postmortem. What's a postmortem? Okay, a postmortem is just looking back at your decision-making process, notice the word process there, and reviewing it and saying, okay, how did that go? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? All right, so for postmortem questions, you can here's a sample postmortem. Clearly state what it was you're trying to accomplish, right? Because you go back and say, oh, hey, I got, this thing, but was that what you were trying to accomplish? Like, oh, well, no, that wasn't what I was trying to accomplish, so maybe it was, I got lucky. So what was it you were trying to accomplish? How did you make the decision, right? What was the process you went through? What assumptions did you have? Were they accurate? What information did you use, right? Okay. What did you learn about the process and yourself? So I went through this process and I should have done this or that, or I'm not the kind of person who's actually not going to eat those potato chips that are on the floor, right? So, not on the floor, sorry, in the bowl in front of me, right? So whatever you learned about yourself, because different people go through processes differently. What role did luck play? Always pay attention to this because there's a lot of luck involved in life. Good luck and bad luck. It may be minor, but there's still a lot of luck. So you may have said, I went through this great decision-making process, but then it rained that day. Well, that's not great. Or you might have gone through a bad decision-making process, but it was beautiful weather that day, and so everyone had fun anyway. Okay? So always look at the role of luck. And then what would you do differently next time? This is kind of the ultimate question here. What would you do differently next time? What would you do the same, right? Because you don't have to change it every time. So go through all these steps and think about all these things. Okay? CRAFT. What does it stand for? Clarify your purpose, run a model, assess the outcome, follow through with implementation, take time for reflection. In other words, make sure you know what your goal is, run some model, which you're going to be learning a lot of in the next couple of years, check your answer, do whatever it is you're going to do, and then after you've done it, go back and say, hey, how did that whole process go? Did it work out? Okay? That's CRAFT. I'm telling all the faculty in the college that you know this, so they may ask you to apply this in the future. I'm hoping they do. Okay, bonus, a pre-mortem. What do you think a pre-mortem is? Okay, so a post-mortem is after something's done, so pre-mortem is before it's done. What you do in a pre-mortem is you pretend you've gotten to the end of your decision process, the end of your project, the end of whatever you're doing, and you failed. Then what you want to do is you want to write down why it is that you failed, okay? This will help you avoid doing those sorts of things, right? This is different than saying, oh, what could go wrong? because we tend to be bad at saying what could go wrong, but we are pretty good at making up stories about how something did go wrong, and then we can read that story and back out the idea of what could go wrong. So you probably want to get a job when you graduate, or maybe your parents want you to get a job. Somebody wants you to get a job when you graduate. So let's do a pre-mortem for finding a job. Okay? So what do? We say, okay, now you graduated in May, it's now November, and you're unemployed, and you have no interviews lined up. What happened? So I'm going to let you just answer that. We'll do the pre-mortem. What happened? Why don't you have any interviews? Why don't you have a job 6 months after graduating? Okay, so what assumptions did you make about the job search process, how it works, who reaches out to who, when it happens, how interviews are scheduled? Did you think about any of these things? How do you get an interview for a job at, I don't know, Ernst & Young? I don't know, right? You need to sort of figure that out. If you don't know how that's going to work, then you might not be able to do it. What actions did I take or not take during college to prepare for the job search itself? Not just to get a good grade, right? So you're like, oh, I did all this stuff on my work. Great. Has any of your courses taught you how to interview for a job? Well, we do have the Career Development Center that will teach you all that stuff, right? That's what they're there for, because none of the courses actually teach you how to go about getting a job. Let me just ask you this. How long do you think it'll take from the time you send in a resume to the time you actually get a job? Now, it could be like 6 to 9 months. It could be a long time because people like to do interviews and interviews and interviews and interviews, okay? What role did timing play, or luck, right? Because, whatever industry you're in might be suffering at the moment. And were you ready when opportunities came up? What blind spots do you have about yourself, the market, and the expectation of employers, right? So doing this is a long, sort of painful process. You want to try to think about what's going on the other side, what the employers are doing, what they're thinking, because it's also a long, painful process for them. But you need to figure out what that process is, how to go through that process. And the way to do that is to go to the Career Management Center, because that's what they do. You probably want to get a job. You probably want an internship. Great. So I want an internship. That means I have to get that a year before I graduate during the summer. When do I apply for the internship? Well, maybe I have to apply for the internships 6 months before that. So sometime when you're a sophomore, you're trying to figure out what companies you want to apply internships for. And when you start your junior year, you're probably applying for those internships. If you wait till your senior year and say, hey, now I need an internship, it's like, oh, where were you at the beginning of your junior year? So I would definitely go today to the Career Management Center and say, hey, what do I need to do to actually get a job? Not how do I do my job once I get it, we'll teach you that, but how do I actually go about getting that? Because that's something that you're not going to get in one of your classes. Okay, so that's the idea of a pre-mortem. You're going to pretend that you failed, and then you're going to say, why did I fail, right? So I would do that definitely for your job hunting right now, because you probably do want a job. And if you don't take any actions now, you probably will fail, because what else would you do? You don't know what you're doing. Career Management Center, they will help you figure out what to do. All right, remember CRAFT, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.